Thank you. Okay. Now, so previously we discussed some of the basic topics in Ssjs with regards to some library functions, some JavaScript, and also some functions using which we can interact with the data extension. And this session is going to be the continuation of that session. And yeah, even if you did not attend the previous session, it is totally fine. Like you, for most part, you will understand this session as well. But still, once done with this session, if you haven't attended or watched the previous sessions recording, please do. We do have it uploaded it on YouTube. So yeah, I would highly recommend that one to watch that video as well. Now, yeah, my introduction was already previous session, so I'll just skip it and go to the next part. I'll just give you an overview on the previous session. So previously we have discussed about the variables and objects in JavaScript. And also we discussed the properties or functions of a JavaScript object. And then we have done a setup for testing our Ssjs code with the help of Google Drive. And then we went through some of the Ssjs library functions. And also we covered the use case number 1, where we pre-filled some text boxes in preference page, depending on the subscriber key. So yeah, that was regarding the previous session. Now coming to the today's session, we are going to make a small change in previous session, a small enhancement. And then we will go into a little bit advanced topic, I would say, in JavaScript, which are arrays of objects, which are also called JSON. And also we will look a very simple example for loop. And yeah, this is only going to cover the bare minimum topics for this session from JavaScript perspective. So if you don't know much about JavaScript yet, I would highly recommend you guys to go and watch a tutorial on that on a YouTube. And then we would cover some core library functions. So previously we were mostly involved with the platform library function, but in we will be using some of the core library functions, which are rows.retrieve and rows.update. And also we will be seeing how we can process a JSON data or JSON object. Okay. And today's use case, which is use case number 2 for us, is going to be this one, where we have to read the email addresses which have not been verified yet. So if you see, these 2 email addresses have already been verified using an API call, but these email addresses have not been verified yet. So we will verify, like we will fetch these email addresses first, and then we will be making an API call to see the validation status of these email addresses. And then we would be updating that status onto our data extension. So that is going to be our use case for today. And yeah, with that, we can get on with our hands-on session. So yep. So if you remember from previous session, we have kind of did this setup with Google Drive. So this file, this HTML file right now is in Google Drive, but still if I have kind of done this setup where if I open this cloud page here, and just pass variable, it is going to execute this code. So whatever code I write in this text editor is going to reflect in this cloud page. Okay. So previously we had this scenario where we were reading the subscriber key from the query parameter. Let me just zoom in a little bit. Yeah. So previously we were reading the subscriber key from the query parameter from this URL parameter. And then we were setting that value into an AmpScript variable, and then we were printing that AmpScript variable, right? So there is a better way to do this. In case if we don't want to use an AmpScript variable, if we want to directly print the Ssjs variable itself, that is also possible. So for that one, I'll just Google Ssjs SFMC and click on the first link. So this is where we get our official documentation for Ssjs code. And if I click on the first option here, server-side JavaScript syntax, let me just zoom in this one as well so that all of you can see. So if I click on this first option here, And if I just scroll down a little bit, it's around here. Yeah, this one, accessing a variable. So I just have to copy this line of code and I'll bring it down here. I'll put it in h2 tag and I'll close the h2 tag. And here, this code looks something like this: ctrl colon variable and name. We need to mention this ssjs variable. So instead of using AmpScript variable, I'll just put ssjs variable here. And now if I save this and if I refresh this page, it also works for us. So by doing this, we can just get rid of this line of code where we assign our SSJS variable into an AmpScript variable, and we can also get rid of this, and our code will still work fine. So this is one change or one enhancement we could do in our previous use case. So instead of using AmpScript variable, we can directly print using the SSJS variable. So this is also possible. So this was a small correction here from previous session, or enhancement, I would say. So with this covered, we can finally cover some of the JavaScript topics which are going to be helpful for us. So for that, I'll just go into the Chrome browser. I'll just right click or I'll just open an incognito window, and I'll right click and I'll click on inspect, and I'll go to console and zoom in for you guys. So this is where this is where we tried different JavaScript code in previous session, and we are going to use the same in this session as well. So just to refresh our memory from previous session, in JavaScript, we could store an object just like a person1 within the flower bracket. So it would have the properties like first name, Adam. You can have age, say 23, and its gender. So an object can have properties like this, and we could access their properties using dot notation. Age. So if I access it using dot age, it would give me age. I can access using first name, can get the first name, and I can also use the square bracket notation, just like this: age, our first name. So this is how we were using an object. And we also saw that how an object is very similar to a single record in a data extension, right? So if I go back to my slide, so this is a data extension, and here we have a single record, and this single record also has these properties: first name, last name, email address, gender, and age. And this a single row can also be represented like this. So basically, a single object in JavaScript is very similar to a single row in a data extension. Now, so this is about object, which we already discussed in the previous session. Now, in situation where you want to store multiple values of same type. So here we are storing multiple values of different type as in, here we have string value, Adam, then we have number value, which is 23, and then we also have another string value. So here is where we have different types of elements, right? But in case if we have same type of element, we in programming language use something called as arrays, and arrays are used to store multiple elements of same type. So even though JavaScript supports different types, we will discuss only about the similar type here. So here, let's say I want to store uh, 5 people inside a single variable. So for that one, I'll use a variable called names equals, and I'll enclose this inside a square bracket. So this is a major difference between the arrays and object in JavaScript. Objects are enclosed within the flower bracket, and the arrays are enclosed within the square brackets. And I will mention the name of 5 people. So let's say first person is Adam, second person is Bob, let's say third person is Eve, and fourth person is Charlie. So I have basically stored multiple names inside a single variable. So if I click enter, so this entire value would be stored inside a single variable. So if I print names now, here I can see that names have four number of elements. So here we have total number of four number of elements. And if I expand this one, it would look very similar to this notation, right? So here we have key value first name Adam, but here the value is there, but the key, which is not visible here, is it starts from 0 and goes up till length -1. So this is something we call as index of an array. So an array's index starts from 0 and goes up till n minus or length -1. It goes up till 4 minus 1, which is 3. So to access any elements from an array, we also use the square bracket notation. We cannot use the dot notation here. So if I say names of 0, it is going to give me the first element from this array. Now, if I say names of 1, it is going to give me second element, and so on. I can go up till length -1, which is 4 minus 1. So I can go up till names of 3. And this is how an array would look like. So array is anything which have multiple elements of same type, and it is enclosed within these square brackets in JavaScript. So and also arrays have a very special property which is called length, and to access any property we use length, the dot notation. So if I say names dot length, it is going to give the 4, which is the size of this array, right? So this is a very helpful property which we will need while working with Ssjs. And yep, this is all about array. Now, in this array, I have stored elements of string type, but I can also use it to store elements of, let's say, numbers. And also a very special thing about array is I can also use it to store multiple objects. So we only have single object here. I can have multiple of these within an array. So if I take this one, I'll just copy this one here. So this is, as mentioned, a single row in our data extension, right? So if I go on and paste two more of these, and I'll just change the values. Eve is 23 and is 33, and she's female. So if I consider this as a single record, these would be very similar to a data extension if you look at it, right? So all I have to do here is enclose this entire thing within these square brackets. I've done it here, right? For an array, I'll just enclose these within these square brackets, and I'll separate them with comma. And yeah, this is how we store a data extension in our JavaScript code. So I'll just store this in a variable called data extension object, the object in short. So yep, this is how we will store the value in JavaScript or Ssjs. And this way of, or this notation of storing or representing the data is also called as JSON. So JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation. So the way of presenting an object or an array of object in JavaScript is called as JSON object. And whenever we are retrieving any records from any data extension, we are going to get all those data in this format itself. So we need to know how we process these data extensions, right? We need to know how we can read any data from this object, from this JSON object. So to read any data from this JSON object, first thing we need to look at is this square bracket. So this square brackets tells us that this is an array, and how we access an array element is, I'll just call the variable, which is this one, and I will access the index. So if I access the index 0, it is going to give me the first record or first row or first object, right? So if you see here, it is highlighted that I'm accessing Adam. And if I access the object of 1, I'll get Bob's record, and so on. I can access Charlie's record or Eve's record using the object of 2. Now, let's say I want to print the first name of all three people. So for that, I'll say the object of 0. This is for Adam. I can say dot first name. This also will give me an answer, but I'll stick with the square bracket notation. So I'll just say first name, and this also gives me Adam. So this is how I can access first name of first person. If I want to access the first name of second person, I'll just say the object of 1, which is Bob, and his first name. So this would give me Bob's first name. And if I do it for 2, I'll get Eve's first name. But while executing the code, or while our code is running, we really don't know how many records we have, right? We might end up getting 10 record or 15 record. We cannot write our code this way. This will only print first 3 records. And this way of writing code is called static coding. Like here, nothing is kind of changing. Like if let's say we have 5 number of records instead of 3, it is only going to print the 3 records, right? Or 3 first names. So to do that, we have to use something called as for loop. And there is a very easy for loop in JavaScript, which is called for in loop. So I'll just write it down. For var index in the object. And I'll just close this square bracket. So inside this code block or for loop, anything I write would get executed multiple number of times. So this is called loop, as in it will execute multiple number of times. So let's say I want to print first name of all the people. I'll just take this code and print it, like put it here. And instead of saying the object of 0, I'll just say the object of index. And this first time will get value 0, second time it will get value 1, and third time it will get value 2, and so on. Like it will print basically all the first name from this D object. Now to print any value in our console tab, which is this console tab, I need to use a JavaScript function called as console log. So this is only available in JavaScript. It is not related to Ssjs. It will basically print any value which we provide inside these brackets. So if I print now, it's printing Adam, Bob, and Eve with only single line of code, right? So let's say I want to print first name as well as their age. For that, I'll just copy this code and like paste it here, and I'll say age. Now, if I enter, it's going to print Adam 23, Bob 21, and Eve 33. So it's going to print their first name and age at the same time. So this is how we work with a JSON object or arrays of objects. Now, if I go back to my slide, yeah, this is how we were representing a single record in a data extension. Now, yeah, we have another data extension, I think same data extension. So we have mentioned that, yeah, this single row can be represented like this. And we have multiple of these rows, right? And multiple of these rows would look something like this. Now, to store this entire thing within a single variable, we will have to kind of enclose this entire thing within the square bracket. So this basically makes it an array. So I'll just open a square bracket here and close it here. And to access any element in an array, I'll have to use index first. So I'll just have to mention which row I want to access first, and then the property which I want to access. So let's say if I have a data extension object which has or which contains this entire data extension, first I will be accessing the row number or the index value, and then I'll be using the field name or property. So this is how it is. So even if you don't understand this clearly, I'll just show you with the Ssjs context, and that might help you guys. So for that, let me just show you the data extension which we are going to work with. Yeah, this is the data extension. Let's say I want to read all the email addresses of gender male. So we have 3 records. Or let's say I want to read the email addresses where age is greater than 20. So let's take this example. For that, I'll just go to the documentation again. And under this JavaScript syntax guide, I'll just open or expand this data extension, or just click on this data extension function. So this should reload the page. So if you see, it's just this documentation is saying that if you want to use any function under this tab, any function if you want to use, you need to load the core library first, because all the function which comes under this one is under core library. So let's put our core library load function first. I'll just get rid of these codes. First, we will load the core library, and then I'll just go back to the documentation. The second step here is to initialize the data extension. I'll just copy this code and bring it up here. So the thing with core library function or core library data extension functions is that we need to initialize the data extension before using it. It wasn't the case with the platform library function, but for core library function, we have to do it. And for that, I'll just rename this variable to sample D, since our data extension name is, it is simple. I'll just make it as simple D. And then data extension dot init, this will take, it won't take the name of the data extension. Instead, we have to go to properties and take the external key and paste it here. So this init function takes the external key of the data extension and it initializes the data extension. So basically, we will have the initialized data extension here. We don't have the data yet. We just have the initialized data extension so far. Now we can go ahead and access our function. So these two are the rules to work with any data extension using core library function. Now, once we do that, if I go to rows and go to rows.retrieve, this is a very useful function to read the data from the data extension. Now, keep in mind that I'm not talking about this retrieve function, which is directly under data extension. I'm talking about this rows.retrieve function. Just don't get confused between those two. So rows.retrieve function can read up till 2,500 records at a time from a data extension. So this is a limitation with the rows.retrieve that we have to keep in mind. If you want to read more than 2,500 records, you would have to use something called as WS proxy. We will maybe plan for that session as well in future days. But yeah, for now, just keep this in mind, that while retrieving, it can only retrieve up to 2,500 records. So the syntax for this one is rows.retrieve, and it has a one parameter, which is optional if you see. So I'll just skip it for first thing. And if you see the example, we have the initialized data extension here, and then we have a retrieve function. So we have already initialized our data extension in our code. So I'll just read this line of code here, and we will name this variable as D object. And this is going to be our JSON object, which we discussed just now. And this birthday day is going to be our simple D, which we have initialized. And simple d.rows.retrieve, this basically will read all the records from our data extension. So right now we have 5 number of records and all these records here. So basically this simple d.rows.retrieve will retrieve all the rows for us. Now, if I want to say, print the number of records we have read. Okay, for that, I'll just say write. So I'm writing write. I'm not writing platform.response.write because we have already loaded the core library function, and write is the core library function. I can just directly say write. And here I'll say the number of records read is D object. And this is an array. So if I say D object dot length, this basically will give me the number of records we have read. If I'll just go and refresh this page here, it's going to tell me that we have read 5 number of records. Cool. Now, let's say I want to print the entire data extension in this way, which we have here in this way, right? So that we can clearly see how it would look like. For that, we need, so this, I'll just print the D object and see what happens. Okay, the object. I'll just give one line space here. So this is the BR tag, which is going to give us a line space so that this will get printed in the next line. And if I go and refresh here, yep, it's only going to say that system.collections.arraylist. It's just going to tell us the type of the object. It is not printing the object's content, right? To print, this right now is in a JSON object format. To convert it into a string format, text format, so that we can see it, we need to use a function called as stringify. And stringify will take a JSON object and it will convert it into a text. So if I save this now, and if I go and refresh, yep, now we have our entire data extension table. So if you see, we have enclosed this entire thing inside our square bracket. That means it is an array. And then we have our flower bracket. That means it is an object. So this flower bracket opens here and closes up down here. And this single object will have our first name, Adams, and comma, we have subscriber key A101, email address, etc. Like we have all these things. Now, let's say I want to print email address of Adam, address of the first person here, right? So for that, I'll write another write function. I'll just remove this one. I'll give one line break. Yeah. And to get the email address, first we need to access this first row, right? So to access the first row, I'll just use the object of 0. So the index of array starts from 0. So to access the first row, I need to use the index 0. So this will give me this entire row. Now from this entire row, I want to read email address. Now I'll just copy this email address and I'll open another square bracket, and inside the square double quotes, I'll mention email address. So this should give me the Adam's email address. So if I go and if you see here, we have undeliverable and we don't have anything after this one. And if I refresh now, it is going to give me Adam's email address. Now, let's say I want Bob's email address. So for that, I need to access the second row, the object of 1. I think second row is going to be Eve here. Yeah. So if I refresh now, it is going to give me Eve, and so on, right? Now coming to our for loop. So if I want to print email addresses of all the people here, I'll just say for var index in it does this thing doesn't really have to be index. It can be I, it can be j, or it can be anything, any variable like index in the object. So the object is our JSON object, and here I'll write our write function, and everything will remain the same except this value which keeps on changing. So it was 0 first and it was 1 first. Now, instead of using these static value, I'll just use a variable index, and I'll get rid of these 2 lines. And also I'll get rid of this stringify, this large chunk of text. So I'll just remove this one as well. If I save this one and come and refresh now, okay, we have 5 number of elements, and then we have printed 5 email addresses of all 5 people, right? Now coming to the conditioning. So here basically we have read all the records. Let's say I want to read the records where age is greater than 20. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 4 records where age is greater than 20, right? So for that, we need to use something called as filter. So for that, I'll just go into the documentation. Instead of using this simple retrieve function, I'll go into the second example and I'll copy this filter and I'll bring it down in our code. And we need to define the filter before we call the retrieve function. So here I'll define my filter. So filter is an object, and if you look at it, it will become very clear what this filter does. So here the property we are looking for is age. So it matches our use case as well, like our field name as well. And then simple operator is greater than, so age greater than the value is 20. So it basically tells us to pick all the records where age is greater than 20. And be careful with the case here. G, like except T, everything is in small letter or lowercase. Yep. So age is greater than 20 is going to be stored in our filter, and we need to pass this filter in our retrieve function. So if I do this, and if I refresh now, it should ideally read 4 records. Yeah, it is reading 4 records, and it is not reading Eve's record because Eve's age is 19. So it's not reading that record here. Okay, so this is a simple comparison, right? We only have one condition here where age is greater than 20. But in some situation, we might have to use 2 conditions, and that will be useful in our use case. So let's start solving our use case. In our use case, what we have mentioned is we need to read the email addresses where email validation status is empty, or the email addresses which have not been verified yet, right? So I'll just select these records, edit these, and I'll just remove these values from here, save. And I'll also add a new record, A106. She's going to be named Ellie, and Ellie@gmail.com, and 23 maybe, female. And I'm going to leave email validation status empty. Okay, now, if I save this one, so we have total 1, 2, 3, 4 number of records where email validation status is empty, right? Or in SQL term, we say where email validation status is null. So I'll just change our filter. So I'll just pick the email validation status column. So I'll just say where property is email validation status, simple operator is null. And for null comparison, we don't need a value. So I'll just remove the value. So this filter is where email validation, it's going to read all the records where email validation status is null. So if I save this, and now if I come and refresh, it is going to read only one record, which is the new record we have added. Let me just go to the data extension. So it's only reading this single record, and it's not reading any of these 3. That's because even though it shows that the value is null here, once we make any changes through our contact builder, the marketing cloud doesn't change this value to null. Instead, it gives a white space into this value. So what I mean by this is, so if I just comment this filter, so I can comment any code in JavaScript like this. So this code won't get executed now. So I'll just copy this code. So I'll just say, instead of looking for is null, I'm going to say where email validation status equals value is white space. So I've just given a white space here. So this filter is going to read all the records where email validation status is equals to white space. Now, if I save this, and now if I refresh here, I'm going to get the first 3 records, Adam, Eve, and Mac, right? So the first one, this one has the value null, and this one has the value white space. Now, in this situation, I need to use 2 conditions, right? For that, we can use something called as complex filter. So if I go back to our documentation, here's the 3rd example for complex filter. So I'll just copy this one here and just put it here. So complex filter has a left operand, a right operand, and a logical operator. So left operand is a filter in itself. The right operand is the second filter, and logical operator is going to be and or condition, right? So let's just put our first condition here, where email validation status is null. We don't need value for this condition. I'll just get rid of the value. The second condition is going to be email validation status equals white space. Now I need this logical operator will change to or. So what this complex filter is going to do is it is going to read all the records from the data extension where email validation status is null or email validation status equals white space. Now, instead of using this filter, I'll just get rid of this filter, these two, and I'll pass complex filter into our retrieve function instead of filter variable. This can be anything, like I can also name it as filter if I want. That is totally fine. It's just the variable name which I want to use. So if I save this one and go and refresh now, okay, now it is reading all four of the records which we want to read in our use case. So the first step is done where we need to read the email addresses which have not been verified yet. Now the second step here is to actually verify those email addresses using an API call. So for this purpose, I have signed in for free API email verification tool. So this tool is called Abstract API. So using this API call, I can basically make one API, like I can send one email address at a time and verify that email address. So this is how the URL would look like. If you go to their website, Abstract API, they will tell us how to make these kind of API calls in like generally in a language. So if I just copy this URL and hit it in my browser, it is going to tell me that the email address which I have passed is undeliverable. So if I look at the URL, first section is the URL, the default URL they have, and then we have to pass the API key. So they gave me an API key. So I think for free version, I got 10 email address verification. And for trial version, then I have to pass the email address. So I've passed anfal@gmail.com, which is not actually there. So that's why it's telling me that deliverability is undeliverable, or this is an invalid email address. So let me just give it a valid email address. So this is a valid email address. If I hit this one, it's going to tell me that it is deliverable. So if I zoom in, you can see that it is deliverable. Okay, now we know how to like make this API call in a browser, but to do it in Ssjs, first we need to pass the email address, right? So this email address has to be from this data extension. So I have to make that API call for each of these email addresses. So for that, inside this for loop, first I will read that email address into this variable. So here we are printing that in this, like here, right? So I'll just copy this exact code, and this will basically give me the email address into my variable. Now, to make the API call, there is a function called the platform dot function dot http get. So this is a very simple function where I can make http get API request. There are various ways to make API calls in Ssjs. You can look deeper into this if needed. So here this http get will take my parameter or my URL, and then instead of keeping this email address as static value, I'll pass this email address variable which we have read, right? So I'll just say plus email address. So this will concatenate here. And then this function basically gives me or returns a response which looks something like this. So this is the response we get from this function. Now I'll just store that response where response equals. So I'll store that response in a response variable. But the problem here is this is going to be in string format, where I mentioned that we use stringify function, right? So this response is going to be already in string format, and we need to convert into JSON format. And for that, we have a platform function called platform.function.parse JSON, and Here we need to pass this string value response, and this will give us the actual JSON object. So just say JSON response is going to be the converted format. In JSON format, we will get the response. We need to convert it into JSON response first, and then I can finally read the deliverability status. So I can read this property of this JSON object. So I can say JSON response dot deliverability, and this would give me this value, whether it's deliverable or undeliverable or anything like that. And I can store it inside another variable called, let's say, status equals this deliverability, and I'll just print that status for now, right? And I'm going to say status colon is going to be our status. Now, if I save this code and if I refresh my page, this should give me a runtime error. So well, I'm not really even though I know what's going wrong here, but in some situation, you will get this kind of error, server error. So what exactly is happening here is there is a runtime error which is happening, and so we haven't handled that error in our code, and because of that, instead of printing anything, it's just going to say server error 500, right? In this situation, you need to use an exception handling or error handling code, and that is done in this way. I'll just go to the top of the code, and just after we load our core library, I'll just say try open flower bracket, and I'll give a tab space and close that flower bracket here. So this is going to close here, and here I'll say catch e. So what this code does is, if you have inside this try block, if you have any error, any runtime error, instead of throwing this kind of screen or internal server error, this error is going to be thrown, and it will be caught by this catch block. So this catch block will basically catch that error, and it will do some action. So the action we want is to print that error. So to print that error, I'll just use stringify method again. E. So E is also in a JSON format, and I need to convert into a string to print it. So if I do this, now if I go and refresh the code, so yeah, instead of throwing the server error, it's at least printing something. So we can track now where exactly our Ssjs code is breaking. Now, if I see, I have number of records 4. So if I go back to my code and see that, yeah, the number of records read. So up until this point, it was running perfectly fine. Then we have printed adam@gmail.com. So we have printed adam@gmail.com here using this write function. So this also worked perfectly fine. Then it also printed our delivery status. So it made this API call, it worked perfectly fine, and it also printed status. And then this loop, as I told, will again run for the next record. So the next record was Eve, and for Eve also we have printed the email address. So second time also it worked fine. But then we faced this error, this big error. Usually we have the message that we really want is at the end of the exception or this message. And here, if you see, it says remote server returned error 429, too many requests. So what basically is happening here is we are making this API call to abstractapi.com, and this is a free version which I'm having. And also the abstract API has a limit where it says that you can only make so many number of requests within a second from the same system. So that is a limitation from abstract API server end. So to handle this one, what we need to do is, once we make a request, so let's say we made a request for Adam, we need to wait for a second or two before making another API call for Eve. So for that, what I will do here is I'll just write a for loop for var I equals to 0, I less than just 100, 1000, 10,000, 100,000, 1 million, plus plus. So I'll just write this code, which will just delay next API call for few seconds. So this is going to delay another API call for a few seconds. So this is a loop which runs for 1 million times. So this basically I will start from 0 and it will keep incrementing up until it reaches 1 million. So this will make a small delay before we make another API call for Eve's record. So if I save this code, even if you don't understand this one, this is totally fine. Usually when we have to verify bulk email addresses, like here we have 4, in case we might have 100 or 200 records, usually the API service like abstract or any other API service provide a different API methods where we can post multiple email addresses at a time, and it will take some time to process and it will return the validation status. This we have done using Everest API, but I couldn't get free or trial version for that one to show that demo. But yeah, this also works actually with this delay of 1 second. So if I do this and if I refresh now, this page load is going to take few seconds because of this delay. So it's going to load. Okay, now we can see that Adam at the gmail.com has status deliverable. Eve's record is undeliverable. This mac at the gmail.com is also undeliverable or invalid. And this email address is also undeliverable. Okay. The step 2 is also done. So we have verified the email addresses using an API call. Now the last step here is we need to update that in our data extension. Let me just refresh the data extension to show you guys that these are still empty because we haven't updated the records, right, into this data extension. So for that, I'll just go back to our data, our documentation, and go to rows.update function. So if you see this one, this is used to update any value in our data extension. So this takes 3 parameters. First one is going to be the data extension name, and second and third, the first one is going to be the value that we want to update. And second and third parameter is going to be used for condition. So in this example, we are updating age to 25, where first name is Angel. So I'll just copy this code. So if you see this one, we have already initialized the data extension already. So we can ignore the line number 1. We can just copy the line number 2. And in here, our data extension name is, I think, simple D. Yeah. Simple D dot rows dot update. We are updating the email validation status, right? I think email validation status. Now, here in this example, they didn't use double quotes, but email validation status has white space. So I need to use double quotes here and mention email validation status inside these double quotes. And this value has to be updated to this status value which we are printing deliverable, undeliverable. So this is going to be the value which is going to be updated in our email validation status column. And the condition is going to be based on email address, where email address field is equals to the email address which we have read. So the email address which we are printing here for Adam, for Eve, etc. So if I just copy this email address inside this one, outside the double quotes, because this is a variable. Now, if I save this and go and refresh now, this again will take few seconds. This is totally because of this delay of few seconds for each call. So just wait for some time. Yep. So this has done the thing. And if I refresh the page here, the data extension, you can see that these data are being populated on our data extension. So just quickly going back to the top and explaining every line. This has to be done because we are using the retrieve function, and retrieve function is a core library function. So we are loading the core library first, and then we have this try block so that we can have runtime errors. We can handle runtime errors, and we can see the error message. Then we are initializing the data extension using the external key which we get from the properties tab. Then once we initialize the data extension, we are creating our filter. So this is for our condition. So this condition specifies that we want to read all the records from the data extension where email validation status is null or email validation status equals white space. And we pass this filter in our rows.retrieve function, and we get the JSON object. The JSON, or using the JSON object, we first print the length. So the length is going to be 4. So we had 4 number of records which had these condition as true. And once we get those records, we process them inside the for loop. And inside for loop, I'm printing the email address first. So it prints this adam@gmail.com first. Then I'm reading that exact value in a email address variable. Then I'm making API call to abstract API where I'm passing that exact email address. And then using the response, I just convert this response, which is in string type, into a JSON type. And then I can finally read the deliverability status. Okay, I have closed that one. So the deliverability, which is going to be deliverable or undeliverable, and I store it into a status variable. Then I print that status variable, and then I update that status variable in our data extension. And then we have a delay of few seconds so that we give a small break before we make another API call to abstract API. And this is the catch block, which always comes with the try block to handle any error which comes in our runtime. And yep, that is all going to be it for today's session. And I'll just go through some of the doubts if you have from the chat box.
Thanks very much, Anton. This is very detailed and very wonderfully explained. I don't see many questions in the chat window. There's only one question about the array, about accessing the values in the array.
Yes, I'll just share my screen to explain that doubt. Let me just copy this. So 1 second. So what happens if we access the object of 0 of 0? So what exactly happens here is, let me just open the Chrome. Okay, now this is the D object, right? Just bring it down here. Now, if I say D object of 0, it's going to give me the first row. And if I say 0, this is going to give me undefined because we don't have any property which is 0. In object, it is going to look for the property. Since we don't have any property which is 0, it's going to say undefined. Undefined is basically null or no value in JavaScript. So yeah, once you get the first row, instead of saying 0, you need to mention the property which you want to read. And was I sharing my screen?
Yeah, we can see your screen. I see another question.
Okay.
Is loading data from data extensions faster using Javascript or using Ssjs? Which one is better?
I'm not really sure about AmpScript. I've not really worked much on that one. But coming to Ssjs, yeah, there was one thing that I wanted to mention here. In documentation, if you see, so all the topics which I have explained today was under data extension functions, which all are core library function. So if you go down here and if you open platform function, and under that also you'll find data extension functions, and here you'll see some of the platform library function, and here you'll see lookup rows and lookup ordered rows. So I'll just show you lookup rows. So lookup rows reads 2000 records, which is still fine. But the problem with lookup rows is we can have simple comparison. So in this line of code, what they are doing is they are reading from this data extension where company equals to example company. So we can only use the equals to operator in lookup rows. To use any complex operator like greater than, less than, and multiple of those condition with or and condition, for that you need to use retrieve function. But yeah, the benefit of using the lookup rows or lookup ordered rows is that it is faster than a retrieve function, because retrieve function is a core library function which is slower than platform library functions. So between these two, platform library function is faster, but I'm not really sure about AMP script actually. Is there a way to access object directly without indexes? In this data extension object, we cannot access the property directly. So if you try to first, this is a layer of array, right? First you need to access the index and then only you can access the property. Even if you have a single row, you would still have to access the index first, which is 0, and then only you can access the properties like email address and all. Okay, we don't have email address here. Let's say age. D record. Okay, where D record in D object for a. So you are asking about the for loop where D record in the object. We can totally do this. So if I do console.log here, and if I print the object of index of, let's say, first name, second, it should work. Second, why is it printing Eve 3 times? Just redeclare the D object here. Oh yeah, I'm using the index here. Instead, I should have used D record, and yeah, this would work. Adam Bobby. This variable name can be anything you want.
I think those are all the questions, Uncle. I don't see anything else. I think that is it for today. Thank you very much. And thanks everyone for joining.
Thank you guys.
Bye.
Bye.